going to talk about the breathing in the core. And this is a foundational thing you cannot skip, because without the breathing in the core working together, everything else is thrown off. This is essential to having the foundation of the house be set and strong if you want the house to stand up. Now, your feet and ankles are important because they're the first point of contact when you're moving, but your breathing in your core is what sets everything and pulls everything together. So first, let's talk about the core. Your core is everything from your mid-thigh, your hip flexors, all the way up to the bottom of your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is a sheath of muscle that runs across your body and it pulls your lungs down. Now, there's muscles in and around your rib cage we'll talk about in a second, but your core, the primary job is to stabilize the spine. Now, your core is a set of muscles that works in 360 degrees all the way around the body, okay? Now, a lot of times we just think about our core as being the rectus abdominis, the six-pack muscles that go from up the bottom of your rib cage down to the top of your pelvis, but it's so much more than that. That's just the external layer. You've got your transverse abdominis, which is like a little belt inside at the very baseline surrounding your organs. You've got your obliques that run around the side, and you've got your QL and erector muscles in your back. All of these should be balanced equally to keep a column around your organs. And so they protect your organs and they protect your spine. Then on the top and the bottom, you have your pelvic floor muscles, which essentially form the bottom of your organs so they don't just drop down. Now, you can engage those if you're sitting there. It's essentially if you have to pee, you hold your pee, it braces that pelvic floor muscle and sets your pelvis. At the top, you have your diaphragm, and it ties in with the pelvic floor, but its primary job is pulling down to open up the rib cage and the lungs. Then, as I mentioned, you also have essentially your hip flexors, and so those are apart because they go at the front of your hip to the base of your spine. Those set the pelvic floor and they set the pelvis. Now, we're going to talk about how that works together when we get to the hip and the spine section later on, but the most important thing you understand is that core, it is meant to keep the spine safe, and the primary job of the core is to brace into a neutral spine and lock this down so that if you are squatting, if you get hit, if you are running, the spine stays safe. Now, breathing is so important because it is the first thing you will die with. If you don't have sleep, food, water, movement, and breath, those are the top 5 things you will die without. So understand, breath will kill you quicker than anything else, so it's very important. Now, the way breathing works is you have these structures called your lungs, which pull open and they create a negative pressure vacuum, which is when I pull open, the pressure inside of your lungs is less than it is outside of the body. As I use muscles to actively pull that open, I suck air in, I pull air into that, okay? The muscles that do that are the diaphragm, which pull down, and then you've got rib cage with muscles in and around the individual ribs, and those are your internal and external intercostals. Now, those pull and open up the ribs to create space. That sucks air in. The opposite happens when we're trying to exhale. We squeeze down, we squeeze the core, we brace down the rib cage, and we push it out like pushing a toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. Now, we push it out because you create a positive pressure environment, which is higher pressure inside than there is outside. There's no magic other than that. You create a vacuum and you push that out, okay? That is the simple mechanism of breathing. And once air is in, that's when it exchanges through capillaries in and around the alveoli, and that gets into our body, and it comes back, and we exchange, and we move on. It's an amazing process. But the whole process is maximizing that. So, how do you breathe? Now, there's 2 ways of breathing. One's right and one's wrong. And by wrong, I don't mean it's like you shouldn't do it. I just mean it's a secondary mechanism. So, you have what's called diaphragmatic breathing and apical breathing. Diaphragmatic breathing is when you use your diaphragm, this big muscle here, to pull the rib cage down, and you use your intercostals to expand the rib cage out, and then you exhale and inhale. So that is the proper way of breathing. The second way of breathing is mouth breathing. It's called apical breathing. And what you think, and the way you can tell if you do this, is if I tell you to take a big breath and you go, if you see your shoulders rise up and you breathe in through your mouth, what you're using is secondary structures. There's muscles in the front of your neck, in your upper back, in your traps, in your upper chest that pull the shoulder blades up and expand space up above the rib cage to maximize space. This is the equivalent of using if you've ever used the U-Haul, they got the little space right up at the front in that mom's attic. That's like saying, I'm gonna fill up the mom's attic and not use the rest of the U-Haul. That's equivalent to just doing apical breathing. If you see people walk around and just breathing out of their mouth, that is a problem, because what that means is they're not actually using the right structures. And so we just talked about, especially with the respiratory system, how when you get oxygen into the lungs, it exchanges and goes there. But if you're breathing through your mouth, you're not getting maximum oxygen into your lungs. So it's one thing to think about, sure, I want to be able to get oxygen in and breathe, but the other thing is doing it effectively, because we have dead space. So from the bottom of your mouth all the way to the top of your bronchioles, there's nothing that's getting exchanged there. So we have to expand this rib cage, get air into the lungs to actually use that oxygen, and then expand it out. So one of the best things you can do is make sure you are not being a mouth breather by focusing on breathing in and out through your nose. Now you may ask, why can't we breathe through our mouth? Great question. Well, when you're speaking, that's one thing, but as a secondary metric to get more air in. Obviously, if I am out of breath and I'm gasping for air and I'm maximizing my diaphragm and my intercostals, then great. Having extra space to expand up is really, really helpful. And that helps get the more oxygen in and use that. So it's not wrong, it's not bad, but it is not optimal or efficient to be doing that all the time. So the best thing you could walk away from with this whole video is don't be a mouth breather. Breathe in through your nose unless you're gasping for air and you really need it, okay? Now, the reason the breathing is important is because breathing is the same thing as toothpaste coming out of a toothpaste tube. Now, toothpaste only comes out of a toothpaste tube in one situation. When you put pressure on the toothpaste tube, breathing comes out. Now, this is why the breathing and the core are related. You only exhale when you put pressure on the rib cage. And now you'll also notice that bracing the core is what keeps the spine safe. When we're lifting, when we're running, when we're moving, when we're picking things up, we want to make sure that that spine stays safe. Therefore, we want to exhale as a signal that we are bracing the spine. If you've ever been taught this, then good job. But if not, one of the things you'll see, and we'll talk more about when we're setting up for lifts, is if I hold a goblet, I set with the breath. So it's a quick exhale, and I lock this down. And you'll notice that when I set the breath, I feel my pelvis, bottom of the core, and the rib cage, top of the core, locked down, and I create a strong pelvis. So if I'm doing a hip hinge, if I'm doing a squat, if I'm doing an overhead press, I want to set that pelvis. And now that does two things. A, it lines my body up to be the most efficient biomechanical machine it can be, and B, it makes sure that I am engaging the right muscles to protect the spine. So breathing is so, so important, and making it part of your movement and training is a non-negotiable aspect, because if you don't have breathing down, guess what? You are just asking to be injured. Low back tightness, hamstring strains, upper back tightness, problems with your neck and your posture are all linked to poor breathing and poor posture. So if you have any of those things, or you've never thought about it before, make that the first thing. It's like learning the alphabet before you get to jump into the rest of school. It's so boring and you want to get over it, but you have to learn that because that forms what you can do with everything else, okay? So breathing and core, foundation of the house, make it a priority.